Dennis, you've seen thousands of breakups as a divorce lawyer. What are three common habits or traits you notice that doom relationships and lead to things like infidelity?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think you have to be engaged. I think that's what it comes down to with everything. So let's talk about like, look, you need to listen. And I find a lot with husbands, it's the one thing we really struggle with. I struggle with it, listening to your partner, making sure you're always engaged. I think also feeling like there's an equal partnership, right? If you're looking around the house and you're saying like, look, what needs to be done? Look, everybody works. In today's day and age, everybody works. Everybody's out there killing it and doing everything. Most families have kids. And when you have kids, there's a lot going on. And it's not just outside the house, but it's in the house too. So make sure, and a lot of this is framed from a husband's perspective because look, I'm a husband. And I've heard so many ladies in divorce consultations complain about the reasons that they're in my office. What led to the split? Why are they asking for a consultation? And one of the number one reasons I'm seeing lately is they don't have a true partner on the other side. They don't have someone who's engaging at home. So especially for the guys, be fully engaged at home. And I think the other piece is don't be willing to accept mediocrity in your relationship. Okay? Still date your husband or wife your whole life. Still be intimate physically, mentally, emotionally. Always be engaged. And know that that's the most important relationship in your life. Everything jumps off from that. It's funny. If you don't mind, let me share you a quick little story. I was watching a video a while ago. I binge on videos on TikTok and Instagram. I do a whole bunch of my own. And I love the ones where they interview people who are massively successful, like they're uber wealthy. And they say like, hey, you're driving up in a Bugatti. Like, how'd you get there? What do you do for a living? And this one guy, he went in on it. And he's like, well, a venture capitalist, I did this, I did that. I worked on my business first. And the one thing that I thought was most telling that he said, maybe about halfway through the response, he said, the most important decision I made in my life was to choose my partner, my wife, well. He said, we have been engaged lockstep the whole way. And that's one of the most important decisions I ever made to get me to where I am.
And I'm sure that takes time and it takes work and it takes habits and being consistent. Like, how can people get better at being engaged with their partner?
I was watching a video the other day and the therapist opined have 10 non-sexual touches with your partner each day. A hug, a kiss, a brush against their body, like something to maintain that connection. Because the reality is, so many people say, well, you have to have a date night and you have to go on vacation and you have to, and then, what I get in droves in responses when I do videos on that is like, the general public says, we don't have the time for that. We don't have the money for that. We can't plan those things. So what you really have are small windows of time, little moments each day. Don't lose sight of those. Don't let those go. So when you come home and you're making dinner for the kids and they're upstairs, they're doing their homework or whatever, that's your moment. And it may be 5 minutes. Or when you first wake up in the morning, you're having coffee together. Those are precious moments together. Don't lose sight of those. They're so important. We look at, it's just 5 minutes. No, it's not just 5 minutes. Because most families, intact families that have kids, that's all you have. Each day might be a total of 15, 20 minutes, half an hour with your partner. Don't lose sight of it. Don't underestimate how important it is.
Yeah, it's a really good point because I think, when you have kids, obviously it makes it way, way, way tougher. But if you don't, like, people are busy, right? So it's like this idea that you can do all these things in your relationship every single day is just non-realistic. And it just creates these high expectations that don't get met. So I think just being present, embracing the little moments, like the morning, I find the morning and then the evening are like the two most important times to do it. Because that way you can get after it during the day. You don't have to worry about being needy or bothering your partner. You can just make sure you allocate time in the morning to be present, and then allocate time in the evening, and try to be as present as possible no matter how tired you are. And I think the rest kind of, at least from what I understand, takes care of itself.
I'm so happy to hear you say that because that's a lot of what I focus on. So I haven't. I'm in an interesting space now because I'm a divorce lawyer who's handled thousands of cases over 25 years, right? And I'm also doing so many podcasts like this with other professionals in the space. I'm doing so many videos and just reading the comments and getting the feedback from people. And I'm also happily married with 2 kids with my wife and going through a lot of the same struggles most of the other people in long-term relationships do as well. So I'm in an interesting space. And what I've found for me is the 15 minutes in the morning when I'm having coffee, my wife's not doing anything and neither am I. Kids are upstairs, they're getting ready for school or whatever they're doing. Or late at night after the kids went to bed, we got a few minutes just before you fall asleep. Those are your windows.
And when it comes to like things that destroy relationships, again, you have this great opportunity, I should say, to, you're on the other side of it. So you can kind of help people reverse engineer as much as possible. Again, stuff happens. But what are some of the other like things that you think tear relationships apart within the dynamics of couples?
I think you have to choose your relationship first, right? I think, and probably I say choose. That also starts with choosing well. I mean, you need to be on the same page. As I've always said, if you start out in a relationship where, say, the wife wants to conquer the world and the husband just wants to go to work, come home every day, and lay on the couch and watch old movies, either or both is fine, but those mindsets need to be in lockstep because you don't want to be in a situation 10 years down the road where your core values are so divergent that you're just never going to be able to see life the same way. And I think another piece is you have to choose to put your relationship first. For me, my career has always been very important. A la that video I was talking about earlier, my wife and I have always built companies together. We've done everything together. She's tremendously accomplished, and we share the same motivation. But we also understand that in life, the most important thing is or are the people around you, the people you surround yourself with, and being able to spend time with the most important people in your life. We understand the value of time and we put a premium on that. I think for me, there's been a shift my whole life, right? Like, first, I needed to understand the actual value of my time, not just as an entrepreneur, a business owner, or a lawyer. Understand, okay, now lawyers, you make X amount of dollars an hour. Okay, as a lawyer. But now if I run a company that has multiple staff, now what's the value of my time? And then when you see as you get older how precious the moments are with your husband or wife or your partner and your kids, now the value of that time is almost infinite. You can't put a price tag on that time with your family. And you need to be engaged together in seeing the importance of that.
And what percentage of divorces you think are caused by infidelity?
I mean, look, if you want my honest opinion, I think, look, I always say choose well. So if you're choosing a cheater from the outset, a serial cheater, it's going to be what it's going to be. But I think separating out the serial cheaters, I think infidelity is precipitated by other things that happen along the way. I feel like relationships die in large part, the proverbial like death of a thousand cuts. It's like a thousand other things that happen over years that we don't pay attention to. So if you want my honest opinion, I mean, generally people are going to say 25% roughly of the divorces that come through the door are there's an affair involved. But when did the affair happen? Did the affair happen before the relationship fractured or after, a part and parcel of it? So, yeah, probably about 25%, give or take. But I think there's a cause for the fracture of the relationship that comes before that.
Right. And in the court of law and legal, the legal language, How is infidelity like determined now? Because with social media and technology, I think it's changed, I guess, the way maybe people perceive cheating, right? And like what constitutes actual disrespect, betrayal in a relationship. What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, let's put it this way. I think there's two different ways to look at it. You look at it from the legal, like, okay, now I have my lawyer hat on, what is admissible evidence? What's the legal standard? What does the statute actually say in terms of what I need to prove if I'm trying to prove infidelity in a court of law? And then the other of like in a relationship, what causes a relationship to fracture based on quote unquote an affair? Is it just, conversations with another person outside your marriage? Is it, actually having sexual intercourse? Is it kissing? Is it flirting? What is it? And in my mind, I think from the moral, emotional, social standpoint, like, look, if you're really engaging with someone else outside your marriage in any way, shape, or form, it is a form of cheating. That's what it is. And it's not leading down a good path. But I think, so let's go back to the legal. I think from the legal perspective in New York State, infidelity is still a ground for divorce, right? And I think the difference with New York now is I've been doing this 25 years. So with in 2010, I believe it was, with the onset of no fault divorce in New York State, we didn't really try to have to prove grounds. Because again, New York used to be a fault state where you have to prove grounds to get a divorce. They wouldn't give you a divorce unless you could prove cruel and inhumane treatment or infidelity or abandonment or one of the other grounds in New York State. But as of 2010, we have no fault divorce. So probably about 95+% of all the divorces out there that are filed in New York State are filed under the no fault claim. Now, are there reasons why you might want to try to prove another ground in New York State? Yes. Is infidelity something we typically try to prove in this day and age any longer, at least in New York State? No, because we have no fault divorce. And even if you prove that somebody cheated on you, doesn't really impact the division of assets or any money that's going to change hands, part and parcel of the divorce case. It really doesn't have any impact on the finances. Now, if you tell me domestic violence, if you tell me cruel and inhumane treatment, now maybe that's a little bit of a different thing because there is a specific basis upon which it can impact the finances in a divorce case, but not the infidelity.
And so you said personally you would define it as having conversations outside of your relationship or marriage, like any type of conversation, or just like,
I mean, let's put it this way. If from the person having the conversation, what's the purpose of having the conversation? I have colleagues that I work with and professionals in this space and otherwise, and friends who are people of the opposite sex. What is the point of that conversation? In your heart of hearts, why are you talking with that other person? Are you talking with that other person to flirt? Are you talking with that other person for self-validation? Like, you got to and be honest with yourself. You'll know. If it's like, hey, you look cute in this dress, and like, oh, I'd love to go out sometime. We should go have a beer. What does that sound like to you? Does it sound like you're trying to ask somebody out on a date? And then what's your real motivation there? Whereas again, I have a friend from soccer that I reached out to the other day, lady from obviously opposite sex. And I was just talking to her about soccer, just talking to her about an injury I just had. Now that was an innocent conversation. Now I know what the motivation is there, and she's married as well. But like, if I was like, hey, we should go out for a beer sometime, like, where that's going, right?
right. Yeah. And I interviewed a evolutionary psychologist, and he had said, we were talking about infidelity. He was talking about the science of cheating, like what data actually says. And he says that there has to be typically like some sort of pull for infidelity to happen, meaning the relationship typically isn't good. The point was, when it happens, there's obviously the relationship wasn't in a good spot to begin with. It wasn't like two people were madly in love, then all of a sudden somebody just goes. I mean, I think that happens, but I think that goes back to the serial cheater case, which is not as common as what we're talking about now.
Right. No, I think that's right. And I think everything you're saying is dead on, at least insofar as what I see. I rarely see, if at all, situations where there's a strong relationship other than serial cheaters, and then somebody's out there cheating on the other person. And there's a number of different factors why it can be, your relationship can kind of be on the rocks or not really strong. But remember, like, think about the things I said before. The conversations in the morning and the evening. The 10 non-sexual touches a day. Like these interactions, if you chose well, you're on the same page, right? Core values, and you love this person and you engage in that way, what are you doing? You're strengthening the base of that relationship. It's the foundation of the relationship. And it's funny because when you do those things, you get reminded then over and over and over each day, multiple times a day, why you loved that person, why you married that person in the first place. Are you going to be the same person 30 years later? No. But generally, you're going to be same core values, right?
Let's talk about something that I know is in your wheelhouse, specifically conflict. I think that um, conflict has gotten a bad rap over the years because people associate conflict with the health of the relationship. And it's also gotten a bad rap for good reason because, conflict can destroy relationships if you're not careful and you don't talk about things and you don't speak for days or whatever. Um, Talk about healthy conflict in a relationship. And then part two of that question is like, how can couples navigate it in a way that actually leads to growth?
Well, let's start off with what you said initially. And I think that's right. I think conflict in relationships gets a bad rap. So if you are honest with your spouse and say, hey, this is bothering me, this is making me feel X, and that precipitates a heated discussion or even argument back and forth, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Personally, I think it's a good thing. I think the problem in relationships, in large part in today's day and age, is we don't communicate and we're not honest about our needs or our feelings. Oh, if I say that, it's going to start a fight or it's going to be, well, maybe it's the fight you need to have. Maybe it's the conversation that needs to be had. Maybe they need to hear these things. Maybe it's a situation where you think they're seeing these things and it should be obvious and they should know, but they just don't. Call them dense, call them whatever you want to call them. But the reality is maybe they're just not seeing it. So, how can we expect that if you don't vocalize the things you want or the things you don't have in your relationship, but things you don't like, that they're automatically going to know? So I would much prefer people try to have a conversation about things, try to be vocal, try to be open and honest rather than just be silent. And in my mind, and I've seen a lot of videos in this lately, and I agree with it 100%, the principle, a relationship is dead, not because you're screaming and fighting back and forth. The relationship is dead when you've stopped. You just don't care to have a conversation with the other person or tell them how you feel or tell them what's bothering you. That's when you know it's dead, not when you're having arguments or having fights. And I think insofar as the communication is concerned, I think that's one of the things that we really, as a general society, we need to work on more than anything else is effective communication with each other. I think we're always framing things like, you do this all the time and I don't like it, or you're always blah, blah, blah. So let's shift that around. When this happens, I feel. When you say X, I feel. I would feel Y if you did B. Don't frame it in a situation like it's accusatory. You always do blah, blah, blah. You bah, bah, bah. So think about it like this. Anytime someone does something and frames something in that way in a conversation, what do you feel? You feel attacked. You feel accused. You feel bad about yourself. And then what's the automatic human response for most people to varying degrees? Defensive. And then what happens with the ears? They're not open. They're closed. We're not listening to a damn thing you're saying. We're not trying to process anything you're saying. We're worried about defending ourselves, being defensive, and getting our back up. So how about, when you did blah, blah, blah the other day, or when this happened, I felt why. Can we talk about it? Shifting the conversation from being accusatory and finger pointing to, I want you to know how I feel when X or Y or Z happens.
Yeah. And is there like a time frame you'd recommend like after something happens for communicating with your partner? Like sometimes people will say, wait an hour, wait a day. Like what do you think is a good time frame?
I think know your partner. So for me, and it's funny because again, I am flawed. I am far from the perfect person. I have far from the perfect marriage or perfect relationship. I am far from the perfect husband, but I think I've learned a lot about relationships along the way and I'm becoming more astute at it, right? So my wife knows, and I have told her, when I come in from work at night, as soon as I come in the door, I'm stressed. It's just the way I am. I want to get my stuff out of my car. I want to put my stuff away. I want to get changed into something comfortable. I just got through with work. I just came in the door. Like, just give me a few minutes to relax and be in the good frame of mind. I don't think there's as much a time frame as there is knowing your spouse. When are they most receptive to a cool, calm, level-headed conversation? Because I think people are different. Some people are stressed out in the morning, some in the middle of the day. So try to find a time when you feel like, hey, the kids go to school at 8, we're getting ready for work and we have a little bit of calm over coffee in the morning or first thing in the morning or late at night when it's just the two of us. That's when you broach those conversations. And I don't think there's necessarily a specific time frame attached to it. I think it's just knowing and understanding your spouse and kind of forecasting, like, when are they going to be in the best frame of mind to have a cool-headed conversation?
There's been a lot of talk over the years, kind of being like anti-marriage, and people online talking about it. Um, you're in the business of helping people kind of break apart marriages, but I'm sure you also obviously help keep them together in the same time. But that aside, what is your view on marriage as a divorce lawyer?
I wholeheartedly believe in marriage for a number of different reasons. I think human beings inherently have this need to, attach, connect with other human beings. We want that comfort. We want that support. We want that companionship. We want that person, hey, I want to go out for dinner tonight. You want to have somebody to share your secrets with, your desires, your motivations, a partner, right? So I find it funny that people are anti-marriage, but yet we're still getting in the same long-term relationships. I find what we're doing now as divorce lawyers is not divorcing people in the conventional sense. We're splitting relationships in a fractured manner. So people are still getting into relationships. They're still buying houses together. They're still having debts together. They're still having kids together. And then when they split, they come to us, not necessarily for a divorce, but really just to split what they've accumulated as part of the relationship. So in my mind, I feel like the best thing you can do is work backwards from the divorce. And as you said, reverse engineer what preserves a long-term relationship. Because we're always going to want to, human beings have this inherent nature where we want to, couple with another human being. And I think we need to work on, forget about divorce, forget about the divorce lawyers, forget about the marriage or not. Worry about building a long-term, reliable relationship. Because 9 times out of 10, I mean, look, there are some people out there who say like, hey, I'm just going to date for the rest of my life. But that's rare. That's rare. They are out there, but that's rare.
You hear a lot that the two things couples fight the most over is sex and finances. Would you view that to be true?
I think that's right.
And so, given that, what are some ways that couples can reverse engineer this and protect themselves from getting into a lot of fights in the course of their relationship?
I think that's a good question. The finances, I think, in large part starts with choosing well. And when I say choose well, I don't mean like, hey, I got to find a rich guy, or hey, I got to find a really accomplished lady. Like, what you need to do is you need to find someone who's going to be on the same page with you, whatever it is, because I think that makes for a much longer lasting, more reliable relationship. And just with the finances, like, know and understand what it means. Like, understand it's a partnership, right? So when you have those stay-at-home parent sort of situations where you have like, and when I've had many of those cases, and those, I hate to tell people, those tend to be the situations that fail more often, is when there's one stay-at-home parent and the other person is, the wage earner, because they don't really see it as a true partnership. I've also seen situations like that that are very successful. So the point is with the finances, be on the same page. If you have someone staying at home and taking care of the kids and taking care of the household, that's what we call domestic labor, and it has a value. Okay. It can't be a situation where that person needs to go to you if you're the primary wage earner, like it's a mommy daddy sort of thing. Like, mommy, can I have some money to buy something? Daddy, can I have some money to buy something? No, it shouldn't be that way. And what the current trend is in that direction is putting a value on that domestic labor. And if the primary wage earner, say, is making $250,000 a year, say, hey, the domestic labor is worth $100,000 a year. So now the person staying at home, taking care of the household, taking care of the kids, has their own bank account with their own money, and understanding this is a true partnership, right? So I think that's one of the big pieces in terms of at least the finances.
Do you believe in like joint bank accounts, like doing finances together, or do you think people can find a way, if they agree on it, to navigate it separately?
I think the best marriages are a perfect balance between your married life and your independent life. So I think you need to have your own account with your own finances and pay your own bills and have your own responsibility. So in the situations where I have stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home dads, like, you need to know what the electric bill is. And sometimes you have a situation where they're paying the bills, but the other person's making the money. You both do. So I think in a way you need a balance. So could you have a joint account that's paying all the bills from that? Sure. But then you should each have your own independent accounts. And if one person's making all the money, there should be a partnership there and some money should be transferred into that account. So again, it really is a balance. Do I believe in having joint bank accounts? Yes, but I also believe there should be a balance. So you should probably minimally have your own personal account as well.
Yeah. What about prenups? What are your thoughts on those?
I love them. And I love them not for the reasons that people are going to think. I love them for protecting you in the event of the worst possible occurrence, which is a divorce. But I mainly love them for transparency. I feel like one of the major things, it's funny because finances is one of the biggest reasons for divorce. And yet I would opine, and I don't know if there's any statistics out there on it, but I would argue that it's one of the things that we have the least amount of conversations about before we get married. Do you have any, let's put it this way, people out there, listeners out there who are engaged, they're about to be married. Do you know what your partner's credit score is? Do you know how much debt they have? Do you know how much money they make gross and how much money they take home? Do you know what their spending is each month? What do they spend their money on? So do you know what their plans are moving forward in terms of like inheritance or inheritance investments or growing companies or do you know what their plans are financially? Like, we're always looking at the fairy tale wedding, right? And the marriage, like the happily ever after, like the white picket fence. And yet we don't know how the hell we're going to pay for that. We don't know how the hell we know we want to have family vacations and everything else, but where's the money coming from for this? So I believe in prenups because it forces people to be transparent with each other about their finances and what they expect from each other if the worst were to happen. And I think when you have those tough conversations, it's the beginning of many that you'll have throughout your marriage, and it proves that you'll be able to weather that proverbial storm.
What's the craziest prenup you've ever done?
You know what? We don't do a lot of prenups. We don't do really crazy prenups. Look, the craziest things you can have in prenups are infidelity clauses and stuff like that, where if you cheat, then you lose money and stuff like that. But the enforceability of that is always questionable. We have issues where they're, enforceability or whatnot, or whether or not people are fighting them. But, I think with prenups, we probably figure if we do, at any given time, we probably have 250 to 300 cases going on at any given time. Over the past several years, we've done somewhere upwards around 8,000 divorces. So how many of those clients were prenup clients? Probably about 1%. 1%. So again, we don't get a lot of prenups, to be honest. We actually have an excellent prenup. And to be honest, it's probably the most cost-effective. No, it is the most cost-effective thing we do to protect your assets in the event of a divorce case. And it has a dual purpose in that there's transparency there too, right?
Because I think there's a like a stigma, I guess, around them that really it's like from protecting, I guess, whoever makes more money from getting crushed in the divorce, right?
Yeah, I think there's a stigma because people think like, well, if you're asking me to sign a prenup, then that means you don't believe in our marriage or our relationship. No, no. I think and again, we get back to the communication during marriages, right? Well, I can't say that. They might get insulted. I might hurt their feelings. But this is something that's killing you every day and you don't want to talk with them about it. You have to have the tough conversations. And while it has a stigma, the reality is it shouldn't. And in fact, it should be the absolute reverse. What people should be doing is having those difficult financial conversations at the outset. It's funny because I was doing a podcast maybe about a month ago or so, and I said, you can judge the person you're dating by how they treat their worst enemy. You can tell a lot about them where if they're arguing with somebody about something or somebody drops their wallet and they pick, what did they do? How do they react? Because that will give you an eye into if you ever get into a divorce with this person, how are they going to be? If you can see that they are going to be logical and reasonable, no matter how difficult the circumstances, that's probably what would happen, even if you end up in the worst possible divorce with them. And that speaks volumes because then the likelihood is you probably will never divorce that type of person because at their core, they're just a good person.
Let's talk high conflict divorce. I've heard people say that divorce doesn't necessarily ruin like kids' lives. It's high conflict divorce that does because of all the tension and stress and chaos that comes along with that. What are your thoughts on that? And if people end up getting divorced and there's kids involved, like how can they do it in a way that's not going to, have their kids in therapy for the rest of their lives?
I think the problem so there's a lot to unpack there, right? I think the first piece is like, look, many will say, well, I stayed together for the kids because I didn't want to go through the divorce. It was going to damage the kids. The reality is, in my experience, is the kids become much, and I've heard responses from kids all over the world saying like, I wish my parents had split earlier because we were left in a toxic situation for years that shouldn't have happened. And yet the parents think they're protecting the kids. But the best way you can resolve a case in a way that won't damage your kids mentally and emotionally is probably collaborative, some sort of collaborative process, what we call collaborative in the business, or some sort of divorce mediation. But that requires two reasonable people who are not bent on trying to gouge the other side to just get whatever they can out of them. I always feel like the acrimonious divorces are really just, and acrimonious family law cases and custody cases are really just the remnants of the broken relationship manifesting themselves in the form of litigation over kids or assets or what have you. It's all about, hey, I remember this person throughout our whole marriage used to do this to me and I hate him for that and I'm never going to forgive him and I'm going to make sure I drag him. Or you say, well, she never contributed. I worked so hard, blah, blah, blah. Now she wants to take, I'm going to try to give it to her the best I can in the divorce case. This is what they are. And then they drag those situations out. And yes, it is damaging to kids. It's irretrievably damaging to kids. It's funny because when I took the collaborative divorce law training, there was a quote in one of the handbooks. And the quote was, what do you want your kids to remember 20 years from now about your divorce case? What do you want them to remember? Do you want them to remember that, and I've had like this happen. You're sitting across at the conference table in the courthouse telling your wife you wish she dropped dead. Do you want to be in a situation where, daddy was calling the police on them or sent her girlfriend over to the house? You can't. You don't want your kids remembering these sorts of things 20 years from now. And believe me, they'll have a hard time forgiving you for it.
Yeah. And so, like, do you believe that, how can people frame that in a way that is going to lead to like having healthy co-parenting and the kids will actually thrive, at post-divorce?
Well, there's a lot of things you can do to prepare yourself for the divorce process. But I think when it comes to the kids, don't be afraid to reach out to an expert. Right now, in this particular space, we've had more knowledge and expertise than we've ever had. And I don't know what the exact stats are, but I'd be willing to bet the amount of acrimonious divorce cases has not decreased, but it should, because you have the resources out there. So the point is, if you're, hey, it happens. Have a cool-headed conversation with your spouse about the split, and then say, okay, now we have kids. So how are we going to deal with this? Don't be abrupt. Like, I'm going to go tell the kids we're getting divorced. No, 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 no. Have a conversation with your spouse outside the presence of everyone else, and then seriously consider having a professional involved. Even if your kids don't necessarily need or want to see the professional in some form or level of counseling, at least they can give you some tips on how best to navigate that situation, right? And then I think the next step is have some ground rules about the way you're going to deal with each other. Make a commitment that you're going to put the kids first and their needs and their well being first. And sometimes I will tell you, both moms and dads, and I think in large part it comes for the dads, unfortunately, is if you were the primary wage earner throughout the marriage and you worked a lot and mom spent most of the time with their kids, and you know what would be least disruptive would be to continue the status quo for them, you do it for your kids. Does it mean you check out as a dad? No, it means you do twice as much, but you make the decisions that might be hard for you, but is best for your kids. And that's what good moms and good dads do. It's always putting the kids first. And then I think the mediation process is probably the best process to use. Now people say, well, I have a spouse on the other side. It's going to go to steamroll me. And then, or the other spouse says, well, I have a habit of like acquiescing to whatever they want. Okay. So then you have a mediator in the middle and you each have your own lawyer to advise and say, hey, no, don't do that. That's not fair. You're giving away the farm. Two lawyers who are level headed, not to litigate, but to advise and consult throughout the mediation process. That will allow you to have someone defending or protecting your interests and give you some level of backbone so no one gets steamrolled.
You hear a lot that people, they end up putting their kids kind of first throughout their marriage, and they, do everything for the kids. And obviously I don't have kids, so it's hard for me to honestly comment, but I understand that that's beneficial for many ways. But then when the kids go off to college, you hear a lot that people end up getting divorced because they were essentially just married to the kids, right? How can people prevent that when life is just super busy?
Well, I think again, I think you have to have a lifeline with your relationship. I mean, and this is what we talked about before. I think couple of, and it's counterintuitive in a way and intuitive in another way. Like, many people say, I've seen it, actually, James Sexton's a good friend of mine. He does a whole lot of stuff online. He's a divorce lawyer as well, further downstate than me. And he opined like, hey, don't compare your relationship to those best marriages in the world. Don't compare yourself to those people who are doing it all. Like, and my advice is like, no, do that. That's healthy to see what the benchmark is, to see what the goal is, and always strive to be the best you can be, right? But just because you're striving to have the best marriage and be the best husband or the best wife or the best mom or the best father you can be, right? It doesn't mean that you don't give yourself grace when you don't quite hit the mark. So strive for the best with your marriage. Should you try to do, weekly date nights? Of course. Should you try to do every few months go on a vacation? Absolutely. And they don't need to be special things, okay? And we'll talk about that in a second. But just make sure you're engaged every day and you're trying to listen and you're trying to be a better partner and you're trying to again, have, 10 non-sexual touches a day, like just moments, like you said, morning and evening, just to have some conversations with each other. And like I said, don't feel like, your vacation with your husband or wife needs to be a $10,000 trip to, to Tahiti. It doesn't necessarily need to be that. It can be just, hey, we're going to go for a hike Saturday morning, just my wife and I, or we're going to go for a bike ride, or we're going to play a board game, or we're going to go to the movies, or maybe we'll take a picnic out to the park and bring a little speaker and play some classical music. Like, that's all it takes. It doesn't take a lot of time or a lot of money. It just takes a lot of interest and engagement.
I think it's just the thought that counts, right? At the end of
It
the day,
is.
I think we equate how much we spend to how much it's going to make that other person happy. And it's just not true. It just doesn't work that way.
And it's funny because I read a book. I did a book on tape, maybe about, I don't know, about 6 months or ago or so, and
They
it
still have
was
books on tape.
yeah. Well, they're Apple. They're on Apple. You know what I'm saying? I know you got me good. Hey, I'm old, dude. So like, it's funny. My in-laws still have a VHS player in one of their vacation homes. So yeah, we were laughing about that. But the book was entitled "The Five Love Languages."
Uh huh.
So I think we don't take enough time to ask like, hey, what makes you happy? What makes you feel good? So for me, growing up, like the way you would express love to another person was you'd give them gifts. And for my wife, gifts don't matter to her. It's time. So like, just if you know what your partner's love language is, what makes them happy, what makes them feel loved, you can really get finer with it, right? So if you know your husband just wants you to say, "Hey, you're doing great. You're doing great. You're doing everything for our family. I love you so much." Sometimes that's all they need. They don't need a gift, they don't need time. They just need to hear that from you. Or your wife doesn't necessarily want, a tennis bracelet or this. They want you to spend the weekend with them. They want you to take some time with them. So like that's what it is. A greater level of understanding and really caring enough to do it.
I'm sure you get people who come into your office, and when you talk to them about why the relationship didn't work, they're like, "I could have seen it coming." Like, what are some of the common red flags you've heard that lead to divorce? Like in the beginning of a relationship.
It's funny because what they tell me is like there really aren't, out of all of the people I consult with, very few of them say, "Hey, I should have seen this coming." There's usually like, "Well, they changed." That's probably what I get more than anything else. But I think red flags for me as a divorce lawyer, because as a divorce lawyer, my wife and I always kind of like chat about this, and we love like seeing that. I shouldn't say love, but very interested, intrigued by seeing how relationships fail and just looking in from the outside. I always say like, "Oh, I just noticed on this person's Facebook page, it used to be husband and wife pictures and family pictures, and now it's like, the husband out on a motorcycle with his friends, or like the wife in a bikini, on vacation by herself." Like, you can see that fracturing. You're trying to, see like, hey, what signs did I see along the way that gave me an indication that that's where they were headed? And I think one of the biggest pieces is not really having a true partnership. It's funny because my wife and I also own a bridal dress shop, and one of the situations they were talking about is somebody comes in and they have to call to have their husband approve for them to buy something. And I always feel like you gotta have your own independence. Like I said, the best marriages are a perfect balance between your married life and your independent life. So if you have a situation where you almost have to ask for approval from your spouse, either to go someplace or to buy something, or that's usually a red flag, because that, to me, that speaks of control. And there should never be a circumstance where one spouse is controlling the other.
Right. How can people prevent themselves from like changing in the context of a relationship?
I think you I think your core values will remain the same. Your view of the world will remain the same. The person you are will evolve over time. But I think if you make a conscious effort to engage with each other, you'll be growing in the same direction. Again, we're generally the same people throughout our lives. If you look at like, even just say like, look at like political affiliations. Generally, people have a certain political affiliation while they're at home with their parents. Their greatest likelihood to change is, say, when they go away to college, or they start their own job, or they start their own family. But generally, it's going to stay then static throughout their entire life. It's not going to change all that much. So I think it's a matter of just being engaged with your partner and trying the best you can to grow together in the same direction.
Well, Dennis, this has been an awesome conversation. Really love chatting with you and having you on the show. If people want to follow you for more tips, more wisdom, where can they do that?
Well, you can find us at DRV Law on both Instagram and TikTok, and you can also find us on Facebook. And if somebody feels like they need, a divorce, you can always drvetranolaw.com. If you're in the New York area, we're just outside of White Plains, Westchester area. So we're in that area if you need us for a divorce. But I would much prefer you come to us if you're in the event, if you feel like you're in the situation where you're going to need a marital split, come to us for mediation or come to us for a prenup. Because again, the worst thing you can do as a divorce lawyer for clients is spend a ton of their money just to go back and forth about these cases. So it was great being on the show. Thank you so much for having me.
You got it, man. Thanks again.
Sounds good. Take care. Be well. Bye bye.